Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flux, and happy Friday the 13th, everybody. That's right, it's Friday the 13th, time for another review of a Friday the 13th movie. Can you believe we're already up to our sixth one of these things? That's right, we're talking about Jason Lives, Friday the 13th, Part 6. And this is the one that I think is most responsible for changing the dynamic of what Jason is. Not only does it bring the supernatural edge to the franchise, borrowing from what was popular then with the emergence of Freddy, right down to the scarred look on Jason's face, not just the deformity, now he has scarring. But also, this reframes the franchise around hero Jason. Now, obviously, Jason is no hero, but the film treats him as if he is. He has just about as much screen time, if not more, than Tommy Jarvis, who's the actual quote-unquote hero of the film. This is the first time that the killer isn't just presented from behind the shadows, you're watching him move through the wood exterior. And that's something that's new to this, that will carry on in other movies. The first 5 films really feature Jason sort of cropping up out of nowhere into frame, usually just a hand or a quick grab of his visage as he's toppling somebody over. Here, the camera tracks him as he completes his rampage. And that was something that was new and unique, and I think this is why most people sort of view this one as the change in tone for what Jason is. Now, when I first saw this one, back when I was watching the entire run-through of Jason films, this is the one that caught my attention because it had that one element that I truly love from Scream, which is this meta self-aware quality. And that's why this entry always sticks in my memory more so than many of the other installments, some better and some worse. And I have to say that, well, it might be one of the first meta horror films or franchise installments. It doesn't necessarily do it the greatest. The biggest problem that happens with Tom Laughlin's screenplay and direction is it doesn't seem to capture a tone. The first, I'd say, third of the movie is really almost campy. Now, it's self-referential. It got like this meta-narrative going on within it, where it sort of recognizes horror movies exist and that this is a killer among them. But it comes off as silly, whereas the last act treats it very much like a true horror film. The gap that happens in the middle is this weird jumble where it goes from being a campy slasher to a serious slasher, and it doesn't bridge that gap nicely. The film's two-toned nature is really jarring and keeps me from really truly appreciating this film, because I feel like in better hands, maybe the script was fine, maybe he shouldn't have directed it, or maybe he directed the best he could with the ideas that he had, but all he had were half-baked ideas that didn't seem fully formed. That wouldn't happen until 1996 when Kevin Williamson writes Scream and has the master of horror Wes Craven direct it. But this seems like a good, almost first attempt at getting us to that point. And I promise you that if interviewed, Kevin Williamson maybe even cites this as one of his bigger influences, whether he realizes or not, in how he eventually makes Scream into a thing, then called Scary Movie. But back to this film on the whole. The humor that's there, it's fun and silly, but if you were to compare this to other meta slashers predominantly, and those are the Scream films, Scream works as a horror movie. It works as a meta commentary, and it works as a humorous, sly in-joke that true fans of the genre get. And that's where this one kind of falls short. What this feels closer in tone to is Scream 3, where it's just kind of silly to the point of horror not really working. Now, Wes Craven's a much better filmmaker, and he pulls something from that in Scream 3. And Scream 3 also has the edge of having really well-defined characters in Sidney, Dewey, Gale, and to a lesser extent Jennifer Jolie. But they are firmly formed, and you can at least latch on to that aspect of it, even if some of the humorous elements go a little too far. This doesn't really have that. Tommy Jarvis is no Sidney Prescott. Tommy Jarvis is like no Glenn from A Nightmare on Elm Street. He's just a character that we're supposed to latch onto because he may or may not be the same character from the previous 2 installments of Friday the 13th. And I say that like he's very definitively supposed to be that. But his transition from the 3 movies is so inconsistent that like you get whiplash just trying to track that character intentions and motivations. He is a completely different interpretation of character than you got from number 5, and the only connective tissue there is a throwaway line in the opening scene of the movie that recreates the opening scene of that previous movie, just taking it serious this time. But regardless, it's the meta thing that makes this thing the most interesting, but also kind of holds it back. Because if you're just tracking Jason the Killer, I think this is what audiences and fans of Jason want. A Jason that is going to be sort of like a lion. You track his movements through the wooded exteriors and slaughtering those who are in his way. Not unlike that film that just came out, In a Violent Nature. And I also imagine that if you interviewed the cats who made that film, they'd probably cite this specific installment as maybe where they got there. That said, all of it is just kind of slightly not for me. I've never been a fan of making the main villain your hero character, the one you're really there to watch and continue. I always enjoyed like Nightmare on Elm Street or Scream as a franchise because they put so much emphasis on their hero characters, be it Nancy or Alice or Kristen to some extent, or certainly Sidney Dewey Gale. And this franchise just doesn't have that, to the point of they have changed the main hero, who's been the biggest connective tissue between these now 6 films, Tommy Jarvis, with 3 different actors. Yes, one of them's excused due to a time jump, but really, there's no character there. They finally, and probably smartly so, just focus the camera away from the hero to the villain, and therefore that villain becomes the hero. The Halloween franchise essentially does that. The Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, to a lesser extent, does that by the time you get to Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, and that's always just disappointing to me. That said, this is inarguably better than I would say number 5 is, and I know a lot of people love number 4 for the Friday the 13th films, but I find that movie repugnant. This movie is better than either of those. This is a slick popcorn, let's just throw on a light slasher and enjoy what we've got. However, at the same token, not unlike the Nightmare on Elm Street films, if you were to just pop on Nightmare 1 and Freddy's Dead, the 6th installment, the tonal whiplash that you get is jarring to say the least. Just as if you'd put on Jason Lives back to back with Friday the 13th, or hell, even Friday the 13th Part 2, it's a jarring transition on how you get from these serious slashers to whatever the hell this is. It's comedy, it's slasher, it's never really scary. This movie has more scares in it than Freddy's Dead does. I do think the last act does ramp that up a little bit in two very successful moments, but even that is undercut with sort of silly kills that he has, like bending the father character, the father police officer, literally in half and then crunching like a folding chair, is laughable. It simply is. It's funny. And it's this cynicism that you got in the 80s where anything popular cannot also be good. So if it makes money, it's not good. So therefore, let's lean into how it's bad. You got this with all the 3D movies, be it like Jason, or not Jason, well, certainly that, but with Jaws 3D, where it was originally supposed to be Jaws 3, Human 0, and stuff like that, and it was like this kind of laughable nature. You get it to some extent with Rocky 3. Now, some of those are good, that's like inarguable, but the problem is that the cynicism of the era starts rearing its head when it takes its high popular entertainment and reduces them to pure camp. And it's unfortunate that that happens, because sometimes these are good movies. I think there is merit into that first Friday the 13th movie. Even if it was just a cash grab to capitalize on Halloween, there are qualities that first Friday has that I think cinema is kind of better for having. And by the time you get here, it doesn't really have that. However, with this installment, you do get the nugget of an idea that will be expanded upon and fleshed out creatively and thoughtfully a couple years down the line with Scream. And I think it's really this film, along with Wes Craven's New Nightmare, that you get a successful film such as Scream. And it's not lost on me that those two installments are a Freddy and a Jason that kind of merge together to make the purest love letter to horror cinema, or slasher cinema, that there is. Alright, so now that's all said and done. Where do I land with this film? I think it's okay. It's certainly better than most. I think it's kind of on par with Friday the 13th Part 3D, which is my second favorite of the Friday the 13th films thus far, after the first one, which is the only one that I would say is truly, good. But given the choice between watching Friday the 13th 3D or this one, I would probably just give that one a slight edge because it takes itself seriously, and this one just never does. What I was saying before I kind of went down this winding track, is there are two moments of actual scares in the film. One is when you have Jason being a stalker, and you see the woman putting the child to bed, the window, or she gets back up, and in the frame of the window you see Jason there, and then he just slowly follows her, kind of like a cat stalking its prey, and that's a very effective scene. It builds tension. The filmmaker is capable of providing this, he just chooses not to a lot of the times. It's most effective in that last act, but everything leading up to that, it's just not there. That's because of script. That said, the other scene that is really truly jarring, and the one thing that I think makes this film also interesting, is that you have an actively open camp for the first time in all 6 installments. And there are children there, and children could fall prey to his victim, though Jason doesn't have as much of a drive to slaughter children as he does to slaughter the camp counselors that ruined him and his mother, and it's all just superfluous at this point. But the scene where he is bending over the little girl and the camera just gets this nice tight close-up of his face as he's leaning into the camera frame is pretty unsettling. And I think if you had that play throughout the film more, you get a much better film. I would like to see the filmmaker, I know it's the same person, the filmmaker who made those scenes really elevate the slasher genre and make, if you're going to have a hero Jason, really truly make it scary, because you don't know when he's going to strike or who he's going to strike at or when he's not. That makes for a compelling hero-villain. And the fact that we only get in 2 scenes is disappointing. Or, if you are going to give us a satirical version of Friday the 13th that kind of dismantles the tropes of these franchises, then give us that movie all the way through. Because by the time you get to the end, when it starts being serious, you do get like the, whoa, wait, I thought we were having fun here. This is serious? Okay, I need to recalibrate here. And I think a lot of that comes from either the script was written one way or it was written the other. And then studio notes probably started rearing their head. This is all my guesswork, but I feel like I'm probably pretty on board with it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the emergence of, at the time, Jason was kind of it. When this movie came out, actually on my birthday in 1986, this movie's exactly as old as me. Anyway, when this movie came out, Halloween as a franchise had kind of come and gone. There was 2 movies, a third that died, and the 4th had yet to come out. It would be 2 years before it did. So effectively, Michael Myers wasn't a slasher, truly, on cinema screens anymore. So Jason had the first 6 years of the 80s almost all to himself. But then, Freddy came. And with Freddy came supernatural horror. And that's where the transition from Jason, who was as lunacy as his plot is, trying to track how he is still alive when he drowned as a child and then was forgotten somewhere in the woods as his mom was being a killer and she never interacted with him ever. Like, ignoring all of that, the first 5 films are relatively grounded. And this film isn't. In this film, you have a supernatural killer. And you have that because of the emergence of Freddy. The one thing that Freddy has over Jason is he talks, and Jason doesn't. Now, some people think that a silent killer is scarier. Some people think a killer that plays with his food is scarier. I happen to fall into the Freddy camp. But you can see the success of Freddy starting to transition the genre even at this early age, where there was only 2 Freddy films and a 3rd one clearly on the way. And you see this also in the Halloween franchise too. It's with the 4th and 5th installment of Halloween, particularly that 5th one, that it starts treading down a path of supernatural horror, because Freddy was so overpoweringly successful, more so even than Jason. And that's that begins in this installment. We'll see how that moves into Friday the 13th, 7, and 8, before the 3 franchises of Freddy, Jason, and Michael Myers all start to wipe themselves clean of everything and get reduced back to what they originally were. We'll get there. It's going to take a little while for that to happen, and the scream of it all. But yes, we do have another Friday the 13th coming up this year, so you will get my review of the film that I remember as being my favorite entry of the Friday the 13th franchise. That said, I also remember liking this one, number 6, a lot more than I ultimately did when I had analysis mode on. That said, this film is fine. I give it 2.5 stars. It is a perfectly satisfactory way to spend your time, and one of the better Jason movies, certainly to the point of release. And I think in the franchise overall, when I finally have reviewed all 12 films, you will see this one in the top 5 of the list, I think inarguably. Unless the remaining films all just like way overperform in my estimation of my memory of them. That said, I'm excited to touch on number 7 in December, when Friday the 13th hits once more. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of this film in the comments down below. And also in that video, I'll probably talk to you about Tom Laughlin, who directed this, had a pitch for number 7 that the studio didn't go with. And he kind of repitched it again just a couple years back. And I'm curious to see how his pitch versus the film we ultimately got stack up against each other, because a lot of people really love this Jason. So let's see what happens when we get there. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. Thanks for watching. I keep saying that, but I mean it right here. Peace.